Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Lantern's Quest. This is episode 21 in our series Exploring a Sketchbook of Christ. We're in the Gospel of Mark. We're following through the story that Mark gives to us and learning more about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And we'll be in Mark chapter 6 if you want to take this opportunity to grab your Bible and open it up to that chapter, and you can follow along with us. Um, as we continue our exploration of the Gospel of Mark. Just a reminder, the Lantern's Quest is sponsored by Wellsprings Church. Pastor David Barrett here, the pastor at Wellsprings Church. Also, Reformation Presbyterian Church, Pastor Lucas Bombach can't be with us this evening, but he's a regular as well. The link for those two churches are in the description below, and I encourage you to take some time and check out what they have there, look at past services, and maybe a church for you, maybe a church you would recommend for someone else. Also, Bradford Christian College, an online college providing a number of degrees, the bachelor level, Master of Arts in Theological Studies as well. Um, and even though it's an online college, it's not an alone college. You have a mentor assigned as a student with Bradford. You have a mentor assigned to you that walks with you through your program, challenges you with further questions, helps you understand better the content that you're studying, um, opportunity to discuss further application of what it is that you're studying. And so encourage you to take a look at that website, a link in the description below. Also, Covenant Academy Online, roughly grades 4 through 12 online classes for students, biblically based. All subject areas are potentially available. A lot of homeschooling families like to use Covenant Academy Online for some of the more difficult classes, a science class or an advanced math class to help them in their homeschooling. So please check out that information, and might be useful for you or might be a good recommendation for someone you know. All right. So, David, it'll be just the two of us carrying
All
the
right.
session tonight. I think we can handle it, but would
We'll do
certainly
our
have
best.
enjoyed I certainly have enjoyed Lucas's comments as well. So we're in Mark chapter 6, and I think last week um, we covered through roughly verse 30, 31, although we'll deal with 30 and 31 maybe a little more tonight. But um, what we saw is kind of an interruption. Lucas will be happy I'm saying this, and kind of an interruption to the story that was happening in the first part of Mark 6, where the disciples were sent out to effectively do what they had seen Jesus doing as they went with Jesus, that is, preaching and casting out demons and healing. And then that story gets interrupted with the story of the death of John the Baptist. Um, and then in verse 30, it returns to that story. Now, um, I'll ask you a question
Yes.
regarding the death of John the Baptist. And I'm going to ask two questions. And I'm asking these questions because they're questions that show up in essentially a commentary that I've referenced as we've worked through this. And I'm not sure that they're really significant, maybe, but they do help us, I think about the John the Baptist story here. And the first question is, did Herod have a conscience? And the second question is, which person or persons in the story was chiefly responsible for the death of John? And so I thought that maybe those two questions we could use to kind of review that story. So, however you'd like to approach that.
Okay. So we're gonna go down and deal with the inside of the sandwich.
Sure.
All right.
The Mark
Yeah.
and
I,
sandwich.
I take it, by the way, well, I guess I'll say it later too, that Jesus learns of John the Baptist's death while they're out the on the mission doing their work. But backing up, to what you have asked in particular, Did Herod have a conscience? Well, um, he was certainly fearful about everything that he was hearing about Jesus, um, and that he had put John to death, and word is coming to him about Jesus. It says when he had heard of it, is what some translations say in verse 14. It's New King James says of him. Um, and so, and that's inserted by the translators of him. So, when King Herod heard, okay, all these things that are going on, he's concerned about John, it potentially being John the Baptist that has come back to life. So he has a fear of retribution somehow for what he's done, which to me gives the idea of a conscience. In the story of uh, his death, he that's told here, he'd put John in prison because he kept bringing up his sin of marrying his brother's wife. And it says that he knew that John was a just and holy man in verse 20. Well, he's got to have some type of um, understanding of what qualifies as just and holy. And he needs to esteem that because he says that he protected him. So part of putting him in prison, I think, was to um, kind of try to appease his wife, Herodias, who, if there's somebody who doesn't have a conscience, she might be the one because she wanted to kill John. And so, yeah, I think in fact, it says that he would hear John when he would teach and he would hear him gladly. He probably didn't like it when John got into his personal sin, but otherwise he heard him gladly. Um, so there were things that he said that Herod Antipas identified with, which is amazing because he's one of the sons of Herod the Great, who was a very ruthless individual.
Mhm.
Um, I I could give you the whole story about how things worked out that Herod Antipas and Herodias got to this position, which dealt with, in short, Herod the Great trying to be killed by some of his own um, sons, and so he put them to death, and that kept kind of helping Herod Antipas move up the ladder to get some of the kingdom. And Herodias, she was actually married to one of Herod's children named Philip, who was second in line to the throne to get all the throne before it got all split up. And the son that was first in line ended up also trying to, he got anxious, wanted to get the kingdom, tried to plan a assassination of Herod the Great, and Herod the Great put him to death, and then found out that Philip's mother knew of that assassination attempt, who he was married to at that time. Herod the Great had 10 wives, by the way. Um, Philip's mother knew of the assassination, and so um, he put her to death because she didn't speak up. And that also kicked Philip out of the line, even though he thought he was going to be first in line once his half brother had been put to death. And Herodias was already married to Philip, a half uncle, and she was married to Philip because after Herod killed off her, she's a granddaughter, after Herod killed off his son, which was her father, and her two brothers. He felt sorry for her since she was an orphan child and married her off to Philip when she was really, really young. And between her and Philip, they have Salome, who comes into this family when she divorces Philip once he's out of the line, well, which means she just left him. And Herod Antipas, being smitten by her, sent his wife back home to her home, and they got married. That's the short, complicated story.
Well,
So
that's a
that's what
mess.
John was saying. You guys are shouldn't be married. But
Yeah.
um, I think like a lot of people of the time, even Pilate had a level of a conscience, wanting, couldn't find anything wrong with Jesus and didn't want to be part of an unjust thing. Um, there was the Roman idea of justice, and that, except for those personal things, and if you wanted to make an advance in your political standing, otherwise, as a ruler, you wanted to be seen as a just ruler. And so, I think there is maybe a level of conscience there in Herod Antipas. I think it shows itself.
Right. So let me follow up on this, and I guess a reason that, well, I think a reason why it becomes an interesting question, I think, for us today is because I think I've got the right verse here now that my dead theologian has something to say about it that I thought was pretty interesting. So when we come to the point where um, the daughter is asking for the head of John the Baptist on a platter, and here in verse 26, the king was exceedingly
Right.
sorry, but because of his oaths and his guests, he did not want to break his word to her. And I don't have the right verse. Let me see if I can, as I talk, I'll see if I can find it. But um, so whatever level of conscience he had, um, it was not sufficient to overcome um, his circumstances, right? Because he gave in to you could say the peer pressure because his guests are there. His guests have heard him um, give his oath,
Right.
right? And even having given the oath where he said, I will give you up to half of my kingdom, he could have perhaps saved face by saying, well, what you're asking for is worth more than half my kingdom, so I can't give it to you. I mean,
No,
there would be a possibility, right?
that might not
Um,
go over on his guess.
yeah, I don't know. I'm just saying there might be a
Right.
possibility. So I'm not finding the verse where Gil actually brings up that for, oh no, I know where the verse is. It's right here. Good grief. Verse 20, I thought it was interesting what Gil brings up here. He says, now I got to find it in the comments, because he equates Herod to the stony ground. When it
Oh.
talks about here, he was greatly perplexed, yet he heard him gladly. And so, what Gill ends up saying is that Herod was like the stony ground, and he he has this excitement about what he's hearing, but it never takes root. It just disappears, and it never
Hmm.
changes his heart. And so, I was sure I'd found the verse, and now I'm not finding the comment. But that
Well, I
was
can
essentially
see in
what.
the comments that can be drawn from some of the comments there as I'm glancing at them. That
Right. So
idea. Yeah.
so I thought that was just a really astute connection that he was making, especially within the Gospel of Mark, because it wasn't that long ago that we read the parables, right? And those
Hmm.
parables are somewhat fresh in our mind, and it built that connection. So I thought that was an interesting comment. And so as far as a present day application, right? I think that's part of what we as believers need to be in prayer about, that the Holy Spirit would help our consciences to be prepared to receive the word in such a way that it really does deeply impact us, and that there is real change or continuing sanctification, if you want to think of it that way, right?
Yeah.
I think that question becomes a little more applicable to our circumstances when we think about things in those terms.
Yeah, I think so. And we need to be seeking wisdom. I mean, we don't get caught, hopefully, in this dramatically of a and horrible of a catch between two commitments, basically, that Herod is here. But in our lives, we come up against where we've said one thing or or another thing, and we've got to deal with the fact that we've got to make a decision between two things. We should do always the right thing, even if it means that we don't look, you know, so good in the eyes of someone else. Because yeah, we're to fear God, not man, in these things.
Right. Okay, so then there's that second question.
Yeah, the second question.
Which person in the story was chiefly responsible for the death of John?
All of them.
Oh, right. And well, and having said that, maybe take a moment just to talk about in what ways
Well, Herod
was being
is
responsible.
Herod is obviously guilty because he ultimately follows through and gives the order to go kill John. Salome, you know, how old is she? I don't know, but she obviously values her mother's opinion and probably was a dutiful daughter to do what her mother. But if she was truly the child of uh, the previous marriage, and this is now 30 AD, and they were married before Herod the Great died. He died in 4 BC. She easily could be a young adult, and likely is. You know, um, she should know better. Um, and so she's got responsibility. And then, of course, Herodias, absolutely no excuse for her. She's she's guilty because she had committed murder in her heart of John long before, and now she's
Right.
just getting the opportunity to carry it out.
She's kind of the behind the scenes manipulator to bring about.
She's the manipulator, and
uh,
she's probably been looking for an opportunity ever since John got arrested, especially some way to get at him.
right.
So guilt is
Uh,
all the way across the board.
right. And that yeah, and so I think that that kind of plays along with the idea of having a sensitive conscience so that even certainly we don't want to be Herod and giving some command that leads to the doing of evil. We don't want to be Herodias plotting and manipulating things to and looking for opportunity for evil to come about. But neither do we want to be the daughter here that's perhaps kind of unwittingly drawn into the doing of this evil. Although I think, I'm just going to suggest that if you're ever advised to ask for the head of somebody, that probably that's not a good thing, and
Well,
you
we
don't go along with it.
use that term even or that expression. I don't know about we using it, but that expression is used even when it's not being in the literal and, cause them to lose their job or um, some other thing happen in their life that is detrimental. I'll have their head for this type of thing. There's a lot of expressions that come out of the Bible that we use.
Right,
Um, and we need to watch that we're not either the person saying that or like this, the person who's in the position to where we've got a pressure upon us to do something that is of great harm to someone else, reputation wise or whatever, and have the wherewithal to say no. That could be a lesson for us, certainly in
right.
this.
And so that brings to mind then, we know in the New Testament we're instructed to always be in prayer. And, I think there are many that can think, well, what am I supposed to pray about? Well, one of the things to be in prayer about is the state of our own conscience and what is happening in our conscience. Are we sensitive to the instructions of our Lord, the teachings of Scripture, the sermon that was preached that morning? Are we sensitive to it? Is it truly impacting us, so that we are on guard against circumstances that we can be drawn into where unwittingly we could be part of some other unrighteous or inappropriate circumstance, right? So there
Yeah,
is always something to be in prayer about, and that's one of the things, right?
yeah. When Paul states, and it's recorded in Acts 24:16, that he always strives to have a conscience without offense toward God and men. And I think uh, having a prayerful life, seeking God's God in prayer, but also in His Word, um, being aware of how we're coming across to others, the whole lesson of humility and not thinking too highly of yourself and preferring the other, all works into this, and those type of things keep our conscience sensitive and active, and even responding to your conscience, because you can practice shutting it off too. you know so there's a lot of ways to keep a lively conscience that can be so necessary in the situations of life that we face.
Okay, let's move forward with the story. I want to back up here to uh go ahead.
It was just I was we're going to move forward to the story by backing up. Okay.
Yes.
That's what I was
Well,
thinking.
hey, sometimes you got to back up to make progress, right? But
Right.
um I want to back up to verse 12 here. So they went out, that's the 12 disciples going out two by two, and proclaimed that people should repent. And they cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them. And now
Right.
I want to jump down to verse 30 to keep the continuity of that story thread
Right. We got to
uh,
go
going.
from one side of the sandwich to the other. Okay.
And before I read well, let me read verse 30. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. Now, we've looked at the bird's eye view chart before, and maybe we'll look at it in just a moment here. But on the bird's eye view, for some reason, he suggests that the 12 were sent out and didn't return for about a 30-day period. I don't know where he gets that. Um, I could imagine it's not just one day. I mean,
No,
um,
they're out there for a while.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
I don't know.
I don't
I
know.
don't I
I
don't
don't know
know.
how he gets that, but whatever the case is, it was some amount of time that they were out doing this. We could expect, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and as I mentioned, I think the death of John the Baptist happens at this time, and Jesus is informed of it. Um, and that I gather from uh, Matthew. Um, Now I can't remember where it is at. Um, yeah, in Matthew 14 is where he tells about the same story of the death of John the Baptist. And immediately at the end of that telling of the story, it says, Then his disciples came and took away the body, meaning John the Baptist's body, and buried it, and went and told Jesus.
okay.
And the very next thing it goes into is when Jesus heard it and so forth, meaning he heard about John the Baptist, it'll go right into the feeding of the 5,000. So it ties right into this whole time period right here, which we're headed to.
And for what it's worth, the bird's eye view would agree with you on that, when at least the
Wow,
timing of the death of
I
John
feel
the
so good.
Baptist on that. Okay.
Thank you.
Um, all right. So then in verse 31, let's just read a few verses here. And he, that would be Jesus, said to them, Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. So let's pause there for a moment. Um, and I think I think it's important. I mean, I don't think that God would have the writers of the scriptures waste space. It just doesn't seem reasonable. And so I think it's important that we are informed about this moment where the disciples or the apostles, we could say now, are returning, having done this work of preaching and healing and delivering demon possessed. And Jesus says to them, Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while.
Mhm.
Um, we've seen Jesus do this same thing previously, right?
Right. Yeah. I think, we touched on this last time and I'll reiterate it here. I am sure that the apostles are, over the top in terms of what's just occurred. In fact, um, they in Luke, he tells of a very similar situation where Jesus sent out the 70 and he gives them the same instructions about don't take an extra bag or sandals, that kind of a thing. And they come back and they are telling Jesus all about everything that went on. Um, this is in Luke 22. And it's interesting, one of the uh, Jesus' response to them. And I think we can tie it into this as well. When you get down to verses, oh, wait, I'm in the wrong thing. Not Luke 22. We want Luke 10. Sorry. Luke 22 is another
I was getting a
interesting.
little bit concerned as I scrolled through Luke 22, so I'm glad that you corrected that.
um,
Maybe verse 17, something like that.
yeah, I'm getting there.
Okay.
Yeah, verse 17, the 70 returned with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. That would be the attitude that Mark doesn't necessarily record here of the in Mark 6 of the apostles coming back. And Jesus tells them about all the authority he's giving them. But then verse 20, nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rather rejoice because your names are written in heaven. So he's saying, keep things in perspective. You know, what is important is your position in relationship to God. Yeah. Don't get caught up in this. That's you just being an instrument for God. But rejoice where you are in relationship to him. And I'm sure that's kind of a lesson he wants to be able to teach uh the apostles that have come back, because they've had this great experience. He wants to spend some time with them. It's a debriefing. But I also think he's got to tell them about John dying. He has heard that John has died. And when you go to Matthew, um, let's see if I can get back to that. In Matthew 13, it tells us that uh, oh my goodness. Was it Matthew 13 or 14? Matthew 14. um, when he's told about John the Baptist, the very next thing it says is when Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. When, Matthew kind of mushes together the fact that Jesus went away to be by himself without telling us, like Mark is telling us, that the disciples went with him, but he wanted to get alone. It's a great effect upon even Jesus. And I think because John the Baptist, Jesus said he is the greatest of all the prophets. He was the last voice under the old covenant. He was the forerunner of Jesus to announce his coming. He had a ministry that overlapped. Remember, they even baptized for a while in the same region. And then Jesus left and went to Galilee. With his death, he knew all that John had come to do was now accomplished. And everything is now pointing to his ultimate work, which was going to be a death as well for the new covenant. So there's a lot in what Jesus understands going on. He obviously would have had a love for John the Baptist, but many of his disciples had been disciples of John the Baptist. So, this going away by ourselves, I think, has a lot to do with not only debriefing of what the work they've done, but sharing with them, you know, the reality of what's happened now to John the Baptist.
Right. So I think the as you talked about the death of John the Baptist and what that means as far as the progression of the work that Jesus has come to accomplish, right? That's
Yeah.
another event that just brings him that much closer to the cross, right? And as we move, it seems to me, as we move through the story here, we're given a sense, maybe not directly in Mark, we'll have to see what we read there, but certainly throughout the Gospels, we're given a sense that there comes a moment where Jesus' countenance, right, his face seems to change in regard
Mhm.
to the work that he's doing. And I think there's an expression, something like he set his face towards Jerusalem, like,
Like
he's come
Flint.
to that moment where he
Yeah.
knows this is this is it. This is when I have to go. And um it was hard for him. I think it was hard to a point that we don't even really understand how difficult it was for him to face what he was facing.
Yeah, and we'll get into that, I'm sure, as we get to, the Garden of Gethsemane, especially and other places that show the agony that he actually went through. And as mere humans, it's hard for us to fully grasp that. I mean, it'd be very difficult for us as people who, when we really sit down and think about it, are guilty, and have guilt and have reason that
Right,
we ought to,
right. Mm.
face something. But he had no guilt of his own, and yet he had to face this and bear, all our guilt, which is ultimately, what the gospel's about. But we'll be
Right.
getting there. And so, Jesus wanted to get away, but as it says here, all these people were coming, and it says that they're coming and going. They're there, some are leaving, more are coming. There is no relief for them. They can't even say, "Hey, could we like just, break out a sandwich and sit down and have a conversation?" They
Right.
can't
It's
do
almost
it.
like the sense every time they go to take a bite, here's somebody else to
Right, right.
heal
And they
me,
need something
teach
done. They need
me.
to be
Right.
taught. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a trying time, and Jesus is aware of what they need. They need leisure. They need to get alone. They got things they got to talk about, and so they take a boat and they head for a desolate place. Now, I'll mention it here because that word's used a variety of times here, but we'll see that that doesn't mean they went to a barren wasteland. They're looking for a place that's not inhabited. It doesn't have a bunch of people living nearby. That's what they mean by desolate place, but we'll get to that.
Okay. So, well, okay, but I was going to ask, do any of the other gospels give us a more definite destination here? Or they
I
all
think it
just
might be in Luke. It's Bethsaida. And so they're going to the northeast corner of it's the Bethsaida region. They obviously don't want to be in Bethsaida, but they're going to the northeast corner of the Sea of Galilee, uh, to the east side of where the Jordan River comes in. I believe,
well, okay, let me just interrupt you for a moment. In verse 45 of Mark is where it says
or maybe it's in
that,
Mark then. I had it in my
yeah, and
notes.
so after the feeding of the 5,000, it says that he tells his disciples to get into the boat and go to Bethsaida there. So it seems to me that this is a
Um,
different place that we're talking about here. Is that
well,
fair to say?
I think in my notes what I have is that there's more than one place possibly called Bethsaida. There was Bethsaida Julius, which was in Philip Tetrarch's uh, region.
Uh,
Um, and I have Jesus and his disciples likely traveled only about 4 or 5 miles just off the shore at an angle and headed for Bethsaida. So,
okay, so yeah, Luke 9:10 does say, on their return, the apostles told him all that they had done, and he took them and withdrew apart to a town called Bethsaida.
yeah,
So,
I didn't have in my notes where it was found, but I was pretty sure in Luke. Yeah.
yeah, so
So,
Luke seems to give us a more definite explanation or destination. Go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, I'm not sure where we're going next, but anyway, that's that I believe is where they went. and it was to get away, but they're angling along and probably staying pretty close to the shore. And so I think you got two Bethsaidas on the map there even. See?
That's right. That's what I was going to show here. I just saw this on the map. We've got the one on the right, which would be in the Decapolis region,
Right. And
and
so
then
they're
we've
getting
got the one
out.
on the left, which is Galilee.
Yeah, and there's another interesting thing I'll just throw out there. Luke also tells us that this is about the time that actually some Pharisees came to Jesus and said that Herod was seeking to kill him. And that was probably because Herod had thought maybe he was John the Baptist coming back to get him. And
And so
that's
that
what,
could be a reason to get out of Galilee then at that point.
yeah, the Pharisees probably thought at least they could scare Jesus away. And Jesus maybe had that in his mind. It's not my time to die. I'm going to go across. But it's interesting, just as a side note, that's when Jesus says, well, you go tell that fox, I've got work to do. All right. And he uses the feminine noun for Herod when he says fox, which some commentators say he was insinuating. You go tell that person who's controlled by his wife. Anyway, that's just a sidelight people can look into. But they head over. Yeah, I believe they went into Decapolis, got a little bit outside of Herod Antipas's um, reach. Uh, Plus, the primary thing to get away. But the crowd, these towns are pretty close, but I don't know if it's all the same people or some people went running and other people saw them and said, "What are you doing?" They said, "Jesus is headed on over this way," and other people joined in. I'm not sure how it all worked out, but um, they go to this place, but it says in verse 33, but the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him and ran there on foot from all the cities. So they did come from different cities, probably people find, a growing crowd running in a certain direction, and knowing that they knew Jesus, these people, and they wanted to see him, went running as well. And in verse 34, when they get to their location, it's a multitude.
Right. So let's pick up at 33 here and we'll read, let's read through these verses here about what happens. Now, many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away, go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But Jesus answered them, you give them something to eat." And the disciples said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And Jesus said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, "Five and two fish." Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by fifties. And taking the loaves and the two fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the two fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. So it's probably a pretty well-known story by people, the feeding of the 5,000. But one thing I want to start with here is that they ran there on foot from all the towns. So if we've
What?
got our
Oh,
correct
okay.
Bethsaida or in the Decapolis region,
Hmm.
and it says that, the reason it's called the Decapolis is because it's the region of the 10 cities.
Right.
And so there are a number of towns. Now, the last time Jesus was in Decapolis was delivering the demoniac, right?
Down
And
south.
the
Yeah.
yeah, and the people there didn't want him to stay. They said, "Leave, get out of here." Right? But the demoniac remained, and Jesus said, "Go around and tell everybody what I did for you." I think it suggests that that guy was successful in his evangelism. because now people are running to see Jesus when he shows up there. I just want to suggest that. But
Right. It's
um,
possible. I don't know how far the word spread and how it spread. I always picture them running along the northern shore, and so they'd come to a couple of different cities, and people would, well, what's going on? And they would tell them, and so they would keep going. But who knows how the word spread? And certainly it said many knew him. And so they ran there on foot from all the cities. So it's certainly at least two or more cities that they were coming from.
right, so this is outside the region of Galilee. I mean, we'd have to say this is outside Israel, right? I mean, the at least the region is not um, the region that Jews are would typically be living in, right? Because they would be Galilee or down in Judah.
No, it's not far over the borders, so it wouldn't be unusual, I'm sure, for them to be over there. But yeah, it's would not, there'll be Gentiles for sure.
Right. So um, I think this verse 34 is really interesting because when Jesus looks upon that crowd, we're given this wonderful word picture that he
Right.
sees them like sheep without a shepherd. So maybe you want to pick up there and go with that thought for a
I'm going to
while.
start with moved with compassion,
Okay.
and then we'll go to sheep without shepherd. Because
Sure.
in my research, I found something very interesting. That is a very unique word that's used there in the sense, well, first of all, it means a very deep yearning in the bowels. So this is a deep feeling that Jesus has for them. And it is used 12 times in the New Testament and is only used in connection with Jesus. It is only used in connection with Jesus, either telling of his own feeling or three times, I think it is. Jesus uses it, for example, in a parable to speak of the feeling that one had for another, like the Good Samaritan. He is moved with this kind of passion when he cares for um, the individual that's been beaten along uh, the path. And so, this is a unique expression of the divine compassion that Jesus was expressing for those who, as it says here, are like sheep without a shepherd. And, without looking into that word and researching it across, you might miss the depth of what is being said here. And, sheep uh, need a shepherd. I'm not I'm not that adept on taking care of sheep, but if they're just left out in the open, wandering here and there, they have difficulty finding food. They need protection from outside dangers, um, and all these kind of things. They're in many ways a helpless animal, and they need a shepherd that they can hear the voice and come and he can lead them to where they need to go next and that kind of a thing. And that's the type of um, compassion that Jesus has for these people. They have rushed to this area. They at least have this great affinity of wanting to be where Jesus is at, but they're ignorant of the truth. They um, don't know the substance of the gospel, those type of things, and so he begins to teach them. Jesus is the good shepherd who takes care of the sheep, and so in seeing these people in that light, he begins to shepherd them there on the hillside or desolate area. Um, Deserted place is another way you could think about it. A place where the people aren't inhabiting.
Right. So, yeah, I like that you brought up the depth of that word compassion because as humans, mere humans, we like to think that we have compassion, but this is such a deep-seated emotion or feeling
It is.
that maybe none of us have ever experienced it to the degree that Jesus does. Maybe that would be fair to say. But it leads to, people may have heard, in fact, in the King James Version, there is a phrase called that's the bowels of mercy.
Right.
And it's playing off of this idea of the depth of feeling, and it's a depth of feeling that moves Jesus to take action, right? And so it's really powerful. And the thing is, within that word compassion is the word passion, right?
Right.
And that's the word we use for that final week of Jesus' life. That's his passion week, where he is making the ultimate move as the a great shepherd for these sheep that need him. So it's just wonderfully powerful. And then at the end of that verse, we think of compassion, we think giving somebody a glass of water to drink, or giving them some food to eat, or maybe some better clothes. Jesus is moved with compassion, and he gives the people, the sheep there, exactly what they need, and that's his word, right? His word,
Right.
which is true life to them.
Yeah.
Um,
Though, if you take all the synoptic gospels together, it does say that he also does heal some of the sick in Matthew 14 and in Luke 9. Um, Luke says that he taught of the kingdom of God and cured those in need of healing.
right.
Uh,
Well, and that seems to be something that we just need to expect in the story of
right,
Jesus, that whenever he's teaching, he's also healing and delivering, right? That
right.
they go
But
together.
it is interesting that Mark makes that very significant focus here of the teaching. And so that was primary, definitely, in what was going on.
Okay, so then I don't know if you have any more to say about verse 34, but once we get to verse 35, this is where we have the beginning of this marvelous miracle that will happen here. And so let's talk about that miracle.
Yeah, so it says that um, it grew late, so it's getting late in the day, and all these people have run there, and it's not like they stopped and had lunch along the way. They're there, and he's been teaching, and the hour's gotten late, and it's a desolate place. Another version says a deserted place. Again, the idea is it's not like they're just on the edge of town. You could just go get something to eat. They're away from inhabited places, although there is villages around, and the disciples um, encourage Jesus, you need to send them away so they can go get something to eat because of how late the hour is. And Jesus' response is rather startling to them because he says, you give them something to eat. Now, Jesus knows, I believe, what he's going to do. He's got a lesson to teach, all based on the bread of life, and that'll be coming out um, later uh, when he deals with all the people at a later time. But here he's ready to minister to them and purposely do it. And he answers and says, "You give them something to eat." He's also teaching the disciples that they need to be ready to um, to be giving of the true bread. But he's going to use the tangible to teach, the spiritual lesson. And so they say to him, "Shall we go buy 200 denarii worth of bread?" Okay, we haven't talked about how big this crowd is. Okay. And this is one of the indications that we can start thinking about how big this crowd is, because a denarii was 1 day's wage. So when you're talking about 200 denarii worth of bread, he's saying about 7 or 8 months worth of earnings need to be used to get what's necessary to feed this crowd. The 5,000 that we're told are here, Matthew makes it very clear it's 5,000 men. Most of them probably were married. You're talking close to 10,000 in couples. They would have had children, you know, possibly they came along with them. Some have estimated upwards of 25,000 people. It's at least 10, 15, maybe 20, maybe 25,000 people here. We're talking about a crowd, okay? And so that is probably a little bit of a snide remark or, oh, come on, Jesus, we're going to go buy 200 denarii worth of bread to give them something to eat. It's it's well beyond um, their means, and so that's probably why that reaction's there. And
Right. And but it also illustrates how the disciples think on a very different plane than Jesus thinks on, right? Because the
oh yeah,
disciples are about the material. And this would have been, I don't know that, I mean, I can't say what was in the mind of the disciples, but if you remember, now we didn't have this story in the Gospel of Mark, but we know in the other Gospels the story of Jesus with the woman at the well, right? And they went to get food for Jesus, right? They come
uh-huh.
back, and Jesus, um, they're wondering, oh, well, where did you get the food? Who brought you the food? And Jesus is saying, well, I have food that you don't know of, and doing the will of his Father feeds him and restores him. And so it's just another instance where they're just operating on different planes. And of course, Jesus is obviously, right, instructing and teaching them to bring them to this level of
Right.
thinking about
And
things that's very different for them.
yeah, and they'd also seen miracles, but the miracles have been casting out demons, um, healing illnesses. A handful of them saw a raising from the dead. I guess there's also that one widow's son that maybe all of them witnessed, but they've not seen Jesus. Oh, well, he has controlled the elements, but they haven't seen Jesus, the creator. He's going to create things here. Okay. And that's another thing that's going to be shown to them now. But they didn't think, their response wasn't to you give them something to eat, wasn't okay, so how are we going to do this, Jesus? Let's go. you know, it was
Although they had been out performing miracles, right? So,
they too. That's true. That's a good
like,
point. But who had created something out of nothing or out of little? Yeah. I think they're
Jesus
going
had
to
turned the
see
water into wine, but that was kind of an unobserved miracle, right? I mean, that was like,
that was just yeah, where were the disciples are probably around, but yeah. Okay. So that's where we're headed in this. And so Jesus says, well, let's start with what we got. How many loaves do you have? Go and see. Go see what you can find. And so somebody comes up with 5 loaves and 2 fish. 5 loaves and 2 fish for 15, 20,000 people or so. But we see a couple things here. Jesus is saying, well, what are the means that we have to use? And I think ultimately that's kind of where we're at when we're asked to do things in this world as Christ's disciples, feel a burden to share the gospel with others, or how could I help, a needy situation? Well, what can I do? What do I have? And it might be very surprising to us how much Jesus utilizes the little we have to offer. I think that's a basic lesson that we're being taught here. The second is, possibly should be the first, is these disciples, once he said, we're going to do something, go find what kind of loaves we've got, they actually obeyed him, and they went and they got it. Um, I don't know where their brains were at that time, but they're still thinking like, I don't know how he's going to pull this one off, or, is everybody going to get like a nibble and that's it, or what? But they come back with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And do you want me to just keep moving on here?
well, now we're at this point where in verses 39 and 40, there's an interesting arrangement of the people. And um, I'll tell you what I have heard others say about these verses, and then you can bring clarity to it, maybe.
Maybe.
Um, but I have heard others say that, okay, so this demonstrates that we have to do our part so that Jesus can do his part, right? And I don't think that that's right, but do we think of a reason why Jesus would command the people to sit in these groups like this?
Well, my well, first of all, let's just point out green grass. Okay, that's why we can't say this was like a deserty
Okay.
wasteland.
Yeah.
Okay, there's green grass. All right, so that's another reason the desolate means uninhabited. But getting to where you're at,
Well, it's not where
uh,
I'm at. It's what I mentioned that others have
okay,
said.
getting to verse 40 that you have referenced, I take it to mean Jesus said, we've got these people scattered all over the place, milling around. It's going to be hard to deal with them. So let's get them organized. So get like 50, maybe 100 people in an area so that we can properly serve them. That's all I take it.
And
Jesus is saying,
I would
I
agree
like
with
things
that.
done orderly.
That's right. God is a God of order, right? So I think that's what's happening here. You're going to have to keep track of who you've served and who you haven't served, right?
Yeah, somebody might have two lunches before somebody else gets to eat.
So I think that's what's happening. I don't think it is unless you do your part, I'm not going to be able to do my part. I don't think that's a valid interpretation of this.
No, but uh, we have two extremes in dealing with like miracles and this particular miracle, and that's the extreme of one side in terms of God's waiting for us to do things and then he can act. But then there's the liberal extreme that says it's not going to really be a miracle. You see, I've heard this, and it was, back when higher criticism and such was coming out, and I've read people who've expressed how they explain miracles because the whole idea is you can't get out of the natural. So they've got Jesus either having up his sleeve multiple loaves of bread. I don't know how he carried this many, or he was on a hillside and there's a cave, and Jesus knew where he was, I guess, days and days before. I don't know how the bread stayed well, but he stalked the cave, and one of the disciples was just handing him a loaf of bread each time to put it out there. People go to all kinds of extremes to try to discount the miracle. And both of those are just utterly ridiculous. Um,
Right. So, yeah. So, I mean, what I'm describing that I've heard people say smacks of the saying that God helps those who help themselves.
right, right.
And that's not biblical. It's Franklian, I guess. Benjamin Franklin
Benjamin
said that, I
Franklin.
think, right? Or at least he got it from somewhere. But um, thankfully, God, I mean, God may help those who have helped themselves. I wouldn't say that can't happen, but thankfully, God helps those who are unable to help themselves, right? I mean, that's our only hope of salvation, right?
Yeah. And I mean, he can override our stubbornness and in his grace and mercy, he does, and our unwillingness, but certainly his desire and our desire should be, you know, acknowledging our helplessness and our submission then to him. Lord, like Mary, I'm your servant. Do with me as you will, should be how we come at it.
Right. Okay. So, however you want to proceed from where I brought us to in this story of
Okay,
the
so
miracle.
so we're okay with the fact that Jesus is saying, look, let's get things organized here and sit them down in groups. And Philip, you've got those three or four groups over there, 50 and 100 and so forth. Those are your responsibilities. He's
Yeah, I think it kind
laying
of
out
sets the
responsibilities.
pattern for potlucks, right? People
Yeah,
are milling around and joining. Like, okay, let's all get seated and we can get started, right? So, okay.
that's right. That's why we do that at potlucks. Okay. So he takes the five loaves and two fish and he looks up to heaven and he says a blessing. Yeah, even Jesus thanked the Father for even the little that he had. I think that one of the Gospels says, and he gave thanks. in how they express this. And so Jesus took time to pray to the Father for what he's been given. And then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And that doesn't fully express what went on. The verb there is a verb of continuous action. I don't know. Can you go to the NASB very well on that?
No.
Okay.
What do you want to see? Do you want to see?
I want to see the NASB.
Oh, well, I don't have the New American
Well,
Standard
you
on.
could go to the Greek, I suppose, but it is a word of continuous action, and the NASB catches that. Um, let me go over here and read it to you. Um,
And I can bring
that
up
what verse is that again? That's
41.
41. It says here, and he took 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up toward heaven, he blessed the food and broke the loaves, and he gave them to the disciples again and again. They insert that concept in there because it's he continuously gave them to the disciples. It's just like he broke the loaves and he gave them, and the loaves were still there. And he broke the loaves and he gave them, and the loaves are still there. The NASB 1995 um, says it this way. Um, and he took the 5 loaves and looked to heaven, blessed the food, and broke the loaves, and he kept giving them to the disciples. He kept giving them to the disciples. It's a verb of continuous action.
Okay.
It just kept happening. It kept happening. And so that's the creative aspect. He kept creating more bread. We have the John 1 1 or John 1, Hebrews 1, Colossians, they all talk about Jesus creating, um, being at the creation. And here he's demonstrated, or, the second person of the Trinity, the Word that was with God. All things were made by him and through him. And without him was not anything made, those kind of statements. He's he's active and he has the God attribute of being able to create. And this demonstrated this right here. And the disciples, I'm sure they just came back with their mouths open, like, oh, more, there's more. It just kept going out to the people. And he also divided the fish up. I'm sure that multiplied as well. Um, and it satisfies everybody. He he met to a full, to the satisfaction, all that people needed. They were filled, and there's more left over.
Right. So I have heard that there were those who try to explain this incident, that what really happened was some kind of mass hypnosis or
I haven't heard that
something
one.
like that. And the people just believed that they had eaten and were
Oh,
satisfied and that they didn't really. But it's like that's working really hard to come up with an
that is working
explanation from
really
the reading of the
hard.
plain text, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's
but
working
yeah,
hard. But people want to not have to believe that God really can work supernaturally, and did through Jesus here.
yeah, and
Um,
it's so unfortunate that they work so hard to destroy the miraculous Jesus, who is the life-giving Jesus that they so desperately need, right?
right. I mean, how
It's
much faith does it take? Which takes more faith to believe that Jesus somehow hypnotized 25,000 people and got them to believe they weren't hungry anymore, or as God in the flesh, he created what was necessary and fed the people.
yeah. So it's interesting that after that, um, they did take up it says here 12 baskets. It's an interesting number, 12. And I don't know that if it's significant in the way that I would think of, thinking that there's 12 apostles and there's 12 baskets and that are taken up afterwards, and like, the apostles get another meal out of the whole miracle. I don't know if that's the case or what.
Well, it's possible. I mean, the word there in 643, I didn't get this looked up ahead of time, but as I recall, those are hand baskets. Those are smaller baskets. They're like, about a lunch size type basket, as opposed to when he feeds what, the 3,000, they've got a smaller number of baskets, but they are large bushels that they get. So I was always disappointed that when he fed, the smaller number of people, there weren't as many baskets left over. But when you take into account volume, there probably was just as much or more left over. But yeah, this is a hand basket, and it's quite possible, a laborer is worthy of his hire, and they're going to get another day's meal out of this. I don't know.
And then there we have the verse 44 where it tells us that it was
Right.
5,000 men.
Yeah, it's even here
Yeah.
in Mark. Yeah. So 5,000 men. And that was, like I said, that's just the count of the adult males. Many of them would have been married. I'm sure they would run, their wives would come with them. Women were often excited about being able to come and see who many of them would call the master. Um, and wouldn't have been unusual for them to have children. So again, you've got at least 10, 15, maybe upwards of 20, 25,000 people. There's just a great, great multitude. And to think that Jesus and the disciples, we give them credit too, they've been working hard. They've been dealing with uh, masses of people prior to this. They clearly had a desire to be alone and to have some time together. And yet they faced another crowd across the waters, and they gave of themselves in ministering to these people.
So one commentary I have referenced in regard to this says that this miracle marks the peak of Jesus' popularity. And it points out that this miracle is actually reported in all four of the Gospels. But so thinking about the peak, if that's true, this is the peak of his popularity. That in a sense, I guess we could say this was the largest crowd that had gathered to see and hear Jesus to this point. And from this point forward, we're going to see a decline in the numbers of people. You could say the popularity of Jesus from this point forward. Um, is it is that how you would see
Yeah,
this
I
here?
following this, I don't believe it's in the Gospel of Mark, and so we might have to bring it in, or we could just mention it here. Well, it gets touched on. Another way to think of, I'll say this: when we get to the next verse, and I don't know that we can, how much farther we can move here, or if we should, but it says immediately he made his disciples get in the boat. In another gospel, it will say that Jesus perceived they wanted to take him and make him king.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And so he's separating the disciples, and he sends the crowd away and goes up into the mountain to be alone. Yeah, I agree. It has reached its height of popularity.
Right.
They
And
were ready to say, "You rule over us," but for the wrong reason. But
right. And so we'll want to take a look at that. We'll probably want to save that for the next time we meet to
right,
go through this. But I think what you're bringing up there, while we have focused on the Gospel of Mark and the story that Mark presents to us. I mean, we've obviously done this before where we've referenced other Gospels to fill things in, and that's a really interesting example of the importance of ultimately bringing together scriptures to help fill in the fullness of the message, because that's really, I think it turns out to be rather significant that Jesus makes that decision based on what he's perceiving to get his disciples out of the situation. And, it says here that he dismissed the crowd. I don't
Yeah, he
know,
does.
what exactly he said, or, you need to go, or, hey, we're done here, everybody go home, however he did it. But it turned out to be a critical moment, right? Um, because, for thinking of just a person being in the position that Jesus was in, that would be pretty heady stuff if you've got a sense of a crowd of that size that's ready to elevate you. Um, that's pretty heady
Yeah.
stuff, right?
Well, I'll bring this out next time, but just to touch on it, I mean, we saw this early on in Capernaum when the whole city pretty much came to Peter's house after that synagogue situation of casting out demons, and then he heals the people, and they're all there the next day. And what does Jesus do? He gets up early and goes and prays. We're going to see the same thing right here. They're ready to make him king. They're all hyped up, but for the wrong reasons. And Jesus is not going to remain in the temptation of this at all. And he will separate himself to go pray.
Right. And so I don't want to get us into something that is too heavy, that requires a lot more time, but um, just briefly, John chapter 6 is the passage that
Right.
deals with Jesus feeding the 5,000. And
15's where they want to make him king.
right, so this is what I was getting at there, and this will be the next day. And I don't know that this comes up in Mark, this
No, and
particular
that
sermon here. So maybe this will be a place that we can fit in, because this particular sermon that's recorded here in John 6 becomes pretty instrumental in what happens with the popularity of Jesus, right?
right. That's what I had in mind when I said, Jesus also has uh, a lesson in mind to teach here, from feeding them bread to teaching them that he's the real bread of life. And that's where that comes in. And it has a dramatic effect upon who's going to follow him.
Right. So, yeah, so here in Mark, and John, they both have this Jesus walking on the water, which we'll deal with next time. But then John inserts that sermon
Right.
following that. And so we
Right.
may want to remember to reference that, because while it's not in the Gospel of Mark, I think it's an important element to help us understand this, we could say, this flow of popularity, and why it is that, at least to some extent, why it is that his popularity takes a hit after this.
Yep.
Um,
That is
so
true.
so we'll look at doing that next time. Although I want to let you know that next week, instead of our usual
Oh, yes.
exploring a sketchbook of Christ, we're going to have our second reaction time, and I think this one will be um, quite reactive.
Okay.
um, so it's we're going to deal with some matters in the church at large, let's say, and matters that should be of serious concern to us as we consider the state of, again, the church at large. So you'll want to join us next week for that episode of reaction time. That'll be our second time doing a reaction time. And hopefully Lucas will be able to join us next week as well, because we always appreciate his input and wise comments. And so we enjoy having him be a part, as we enjoy having you be a part by watching, viewing either live or later, and of course, sharing and the video with others, letting them know about it. Please send us your comments, um, and we'll love to answer any questions you have, or any corrective statements that you might have about what we have talked about in these episodes. So please do participate in that way, and we'd love to have you watching our videos and learning from what it is that we're learning as we explore a sketchbook of Christ, the Gospel of Mark. All right, so join us next week, as we continue our series of podcasts for you every Tuesday.